Welcome, everyone. This is another episode of the Exodus Project. I'm your host, Steve Eisenhower, and I have a pretty special episode today. I'm joined with my good friend, Yehuda Yisrael. Um, Yehuda, how are you?
Shalom, shalom. I'm great. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing well. Thank you. But today I'm kind of like dialing it back and giving Yehuda the uh, the stage a little bit. Reason being, I think he's brilliant. I love your content. Um, and I really think you're the future of really like this counter missions movement. And I say that because I want to give my stamp of approval, not that it means much, but just as someone in this space, I've worked with, a lot of the people in the space. I've been on Tanakh Talk. Obviously, I have Stuart Federer on a lot, Rabbi Singer, Davon Mays, secular scholars, all sorts of people have been on my show. You've been on my show multiple times as well. Um, but I think what I want to impress on, the viewership en masse is that a lot of the people who do this work openly, like on the internet, right? They're not our generation, which means obviously they're not going to live forever, right? I think Rabbi Singer's in his 60s, Rabbi Federer's in his 70s, Rabbi Schulman is up there, Rabbi Blumenthal's up there, Rabbi Skobach, etc. William Hall is old enough to be my father, right? So you have all these paragons of, this work, but honestly, it's time for a younger group to take the reins, in my opinion. And the reason I'm wanting to bring you on to show the way you do things is because, like the generation of those who need to counteract Jewish evangelism, um, Jewish evangelism itself has morphed, right? So when Rabbi Singer and Rabbi Federo and all them really got into this space, it was strictly a Gentile sola scriptura crowd that they had to refute, right?
Hmm.
But now that's not so much the case. Of course, like a lot of the Christians, like when I was a Christian, it was sola scriptura, right? But you had like the apologetic side of things where you could quote rabbis or whatever, but you saw no authority in it. But now that's kind of like the front seat of Jewish evangelism is using extra biblical sources. And the reason I really wanted to bring you on is because, in a way, you follow Rabbi Blumenthal's approach and Rabbi Schulman in not just the text, but making sure your arguments, and I try to do this as well, is making sure your arguments aren't gatekeepy and really don't go against what the sages say. You can use the sages and the Tanakh because they're saying the same thing, right? And
Yeah.
that's why I think the way you bring arguments and the way you do things is, a good example to follow moving forward simply because of what your main mission is. So, without further ado, everybody, Yehudi Israel, take it away. Um, if I have anything to add, I'll jump in, but floor's all yours, pal.
Thanks so much, Steve. Yeah, thank you for all that you do. And thanks so much for having me on again. It's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for all that you do. I know you put out a new book recently, so I I know it's involving Paul and, taking him, to task and showing all that. So yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. And my goal from that is to, like your approach, to be eclectic and use the sages. I use just as much Jewish literature as I do extra biblical literature, or biblical literature, I mean. Um,
Right, right,
so
yeah.
so it's really a wide view approach to Paul and kind of what made him tick. So I hope
Yeah.
everyone checks that out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
important work. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so and just to give a little bit of background for my work and my channel, Yehudi Israel. It's my Hebrew name. A lot of people ask where I came up with the name. Literally, my parents named me Yehudi Israel after my deceased Jewish ancestors, as most Ashkenazi Jews are named for. But So let's rewind back to July 2022. It was a beautiful Shabbos afternoon, and I was sitting right next to the one and the only Rabbi Tovia Singer over a big bowl of cholent. We were having a Shabbos day meal, and I was just picking Tovia's brain, asking him questions. And he stops me in the middle of talking, and he asked me this question: "Do you play chess?" And I was like, "Yeah, I love chess." And then he said, "Yeah, I figured." And he continued saying to me, "I don't really play chess very well myself, but I know enough to know that you're approaching this like a chess game." And then he said to me, "Don't approach it like a chess game." Words of Tovia Singer. Wise words, very wise man. I respect him a lot. He's basically the founder of the counter-missionary movement, if we're honest with ourselves here. But I'm going to be real honest with you. I fundamentally disagree with this. For the aforementions you just gave, Steve, we live in a new atmosphere. We're not living in 1992. The
Right.
internet exists. Safaria exists.
Hmm.
I've learned more. I say this tongue in cheek. I don't really mean this seriously, but like I could argue that I've learned like half of my Talmudic knowledge from Christians. Obviously, I don't mean that seriously, but like they quote from this passage, and this is about the Messiah, and that's about the Messiah, and it's really kind of weirdly impressive how much knowledge sometimes Christians have. It's a different environment, and I've seen a lot of success myself with debating top level Christians by using what I would call sort of a chess approach to countering missionaries. And this includes the infamous Dr. Michael Brown, who made a living off of contextually abusing rabbinic sources.
Hmm.
And honestly, that's the main reason why I made my YouTube channel, Yehuda Yisrael, because I was disappointed with the fact that Rabbi Tovia Singer doesn't directly with Dr. Michael Brown anymore, like since 1992. The most recent videos that I've been putting out are addressing that infamous debate with Sid Roth,
Hmm.
and how I would, if I was in the hot seat and I was debating Dr. Michael Brown or any Christian for that matter, how I would approach debunking the idea that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. And that's what we're going to go through today, and sharing my chess, I guess I'll call it like the chess approach to this. So, yeah, so despite the fact that the top level missionary organizations like One for Israel, Jews for Jesus, Chosen People Ministries, Eitan Bar, Itzhak Shapira, even small time wannabe pastors like Radar Apologetics, Courtney Smith, Sam Shamoon, Scam Skamoon, all of them quote from Dr. Michael Brown all the time. And Tovia doesn't touch this for some reason. He has his hands in everything. And most of the Jewish evangelism we see today is directly influenced by Dr. Michael Brown's work. It's insane. I just saw Jeff Morgan on, interviewing, from Jews for Jesus with Dr. Michael Brown. It's like he literally has his hands in everything.
Hmm.
So I took it upon myself to directly confront Dr. Brown. The first video on my YouTube channel, I attended his Q&A, or his spiel at a college university, and I directly interacted him in a Q&A. This was in 2013. So I've known Dr. Brown for at least a decade, right? And I've challenged him to debates in the past, but he's always turned me down because I'm not a rabbi or a significant Jewish leader, right? I go on his radio show or whatever it is, his Line of Fire show. It used to be radio. Now it's more like a podcast or whatever. But that's not really the point is the point of my channel is to empower the average Jew and Gentile to know how to debunk even top level Christian missionaries like Dr. Michael Brown. Now, don't get me wrong. Rabbi Tovia Singer is a wonderful resource, and I respect his work. And it's great. But I wanted to build on the foundation that he set to directly confront what I would call the head of the snake, right?
Hmm.
So to speak, because I believe that would be Dr. Michael Brown. So what I've developed is, I'll explain the chess analogy. So the Tanakh is our chessboard. both Jews and Christians understand how the Tanakh works, and that is the foundation of our mutually agreed upon criteria, right? Supposedly, because the
Hmm.
Christians will say, yes, we believe the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible is the Torah, the prophets, the writings. That's our common ground. That is the key to playing chess, is that you, in theory, have a common understanding. So that's the Tanakh. So the goal in chess is to checkmate your opponent, which means you give them no other options based on the options that you mutually agree upon. We all agree how the pieces move. Pawn moves like this, and knight
Hmm.
moves like this. They all move the same. So that's how the Tanakh would work. That's our exegesis, the way the pieces move,
Hmm.
which means using scripture to understand scripture. This passage says, a suffering servant here refers to Israel. And then you see here, here's a suffering servant. Who's it about? Oh, is it about, how do you understand this? Right. So that is that the pieces are the exegesis, how they move. And the goal is you're not trying to stalemate your opponent, because that means a draw. In
Hmm.
chess, if you, for example, if you take all of your opponent's pieces, that doesn't mean you win the game,
Right.
right? You want to make calculated moves
Hmm.
that have a specific purpose to checkmate your opponent,
Right.
right? And that's the approach that, my approach, and you'll see in a second what I mean.
No,
Um,
I mean, not to cut you off, but I totally understand. I used to play chess with my dad a lot, and you can have no pieces on the board, but you could make a game last 9 hours if you just move your king around the whole time. So
exactly.
that's kind of the point you're making is even if you take everything off the board, their king is still there, right? And
Yes.
they can just move it out of your way subtly on and on and on. And that's kind of
Yes.
why the debate has been going on now for thousands of years,
And
you
that's
know.
what the Christian, like, it, if you want my honest opinion, I don't think a Christian, unless they're debating against like a severely incompetent, you know, Jewish, apology, somebody trying to like defend Judaism. I, I really don't think it's possible for the Christian to checkmate the Jew if you believe in the belief. So they're going for the stalemate.
Right.
That's the Christian goal. That's why they distract with rabbinic commentaries. They don't really want to play chess with you. They want to play a different game.
They want to survive. Yeah.
Yes, every step of the way, they will, let's say you move your knight in a particular way. They'll say, let's say you get them into a checkmate or a check position. They'll say, well, you can't move your knight like that. And they'll dispute the way, or you'll do an en passant, which is a rarely used chess move, but it can be used, well, you can't do that. They'll contest every way. Sometimes they'll even knock all the pieces off the board and say, we're playing checkers now. You know, like that's, and I understand why Tovia was telling me this. He said, I don't want to play. Here's what he said directly to me. I confronted Dr. Brown. I said, I also confronted Dr. Brown, but I confronted Rabbi Tovia Singer that same Shabbos. And I said, why don't you debate Dr. Michael Brown? And he gave me this answer. Why would I debate with a bad faith actor? Those were his words, quoted verbatim. I understand why Tovia doesn't want to deal with this, because that's what he said. I don't want to play chess with somebody who changes the rules of the game every 2 seconds and doesn't,
Hmm.
he says he wants to play chess, but he really wants to play checkers, or he wants to, I get that. However, there is a way to refute the Christian, because the Christian, even though they are a bad faith actor, I agree. Dr. Michael Brown is a bad faith actor. He is. However, there are certain foundations in the New Testament that even he has to hold to, that
Hmm.
even when he tries to change the rules of the game, he'll have no choice but to go back to the original rules that we agreed upon, that the Tanakh is the standard for what messianic prophecy is, and not the New Testament. Even though the New Testament quotes from the Tanakh, there are certain ideas that he can't get away from that are foundational. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. So, the quintessential prophecy of mutual agreement that I use I like to keep it as simple as possible. It's 2 Samuel 7, chapter 7, verses 12 through 16. Now, why do I use this passage? Because it establishes the eternality of the Davidic covenant,
Hmm.
which includes a sinful individual. And this is important for later with regards to Isaiah 43 or 49, verses 3 through 6, and Isaiah 53. So in 2 Samuel, it says, when your days are finished and when you lie with your forefathers, then I will raise up your seed that shall proceed from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. Why is that so important? Because this is speaking about King David and his future offspring. It says, he will build a house for my name, and I will establish his throne and his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father, and he will be to me a son. And when he goes astray, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the sons of Adam. But my mercy shall not depart from him, as I withdrew it from Saul, whom I removed from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be confirmed before you. Your throne shall be established forever. Now, why is that the prophecy that I use? Well, for one thing, it talks about a son of David who will be king, who will
Hmm.
establish David's kingdom. The Christian has no choice but to understand in the immediate context that this refers to King Solomon. He
Right.
built the temple, he built, like there's no way around that, right? So, what the other part of this is the next when it says, you know, his kingdom will be established forever through your son,
Hmm.
that inevitably, even according to the Christian position, refers to the future Messiah as well.
Hmm.
So, this is an important idea that I think contrasts a lot of times Tovia's approach, because Tovia is more, he'll say, he'll gatekeep and say this prophecy is messianic, this prophecy is not messianic. In chess, there's a concept called castling
Hmm.
that almost every game of even a beginning chess player is taught to castle. I don't know very many, master level, chess games where you don't castle. It's a defensive move at the beginning of the game. I use this prophecy because it establishes the idea that a prophecy can, in the immediate context, refer to one person, Solomon in this case, who in this case is also described as sinful, and it can also refer to the future Messiah.
Hmm.
And Christians really, and Christians are beholden to this because there's a verse in the book of Hebrews that says, when it describes Jesus, it says, and this is Hebrews chapter 1, it says, um, for to which of the angels did God say, you are my son, today
Hmm.
I have become your father? Or again, I will be his father and he will be my son. If you
Right.
look at that verse, it is, and you look at the footnote in a Christian Bible, it says 2 Samuel 7:14.
Hmm.
Now, why is that so significant?
And the
Because,
other citation is Psalm 2, I think, right? About David.
yeah, so, but you see, this is castling
Hmm.
because what we're accounting for is Christians will say, this prophecy is messianic. And in,
And sorry, but not to cut you off, but you kind of in one fell swoop attacked two of their major arguments with
Mhm.
with the refutation of Hebrews there, or with the citation of Hebrews there.
Yeah,
Because what's the other big thing they like to use is the big Jesus angel hunt, right?
yeah, yeah.
And the whole point of those chapters in Hebrews is to show that Jesus is not an angel.
Mhm.
So with your castle here, not only are you showing the eternality of David's throne and, the fallibility of
Yeah,
the men who encompass the Davidic line,
yes.
but you're also using Hebrews, right, to show that their big argument of every time you see the angel of the Lord in the Tanakh, that it's Jesus, you're
Hmm.
kind of like destroying both at once. And interestingly enough, I don't say this often because, you know, I don't know, it's a minor point, but if that's the case, then why in the birth narratives of Jesus is it cited that the angel of the Lord announced his birth if he was just born? Isn't he supposed to be the angel of the Lord? Right? So it's just they don't have
Yeah, it's a contradiction. Yeah.
not just a contradiction, but they don't, it's like you might word this better than I do. They don't really have like a set parameter, like chess. Like you said, they want to change the game. So
Right.
where it's suitable, they'll use it. Where it's not suitable, they ignore it. Right?
Right. They don't have an objective standard for determining messianic prophecy. The problem is they are beholden to, for example, here, what Christian is going to deny that Second Samuel, 7:12 through 16, when it says, they always talk about an eternal son. Okay, here's a son, and you see your throne will be established forever. So the
Mm-hmm.
Christian is going to immediately say, "Ooh, it looks like Jesus, a son forever," right?
Right. Right.
But then when you look and you see when he goes astray, so the Christian will say, well, in the immediate context, yeah, it's Solomon, but then
Mm-hmm.
they'll walk away with their tail between their legs when they
Right.
look at Hebrews 1 and they're like, yeah, it's about the Messiah, but it's not exclusive to the Messiah. So the Christian already is confronted with a messianic prophecy that is not exclusive to the Messiah, that includes a sinful man who
Mm-hmm.
they claim is, King Solomon. They obviously would claim is a sinner, but they also have to acknowledge, because that's the Achilles heel of this. They're looking for prophecies that would, you know, that's why they love Isaiah 53 so much, is they take it out of context to say, oh, look, this servant must be sinless in the most absolute sense. But you see, this prophecy shows, okay, so this is about the Messiah because it's about a son establishing an eternal kingdom. But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, it's inclusive of a sinful individual. So it's not a proof text for Jesus, but they also acknowledge that it has a messianic aura about it. But that's a mutually agreed upon criteria. So if you
Right.
open debate like this, you have a definition of what the Messiah is. Okay, it's a son of David who will establish an eternal kingdom
Mm-hmm.
based on this eternal covenant made with David and his sons. Great. Through Solomon. Wonderful. So we have our, we castled too, because we have, like move for move. And it's like, okay, so if you bring up an idea that a prophecy is messianic, right? I'm not going to dispute whether or not it's messianic,
Right.
because there's a prophecy can be messianic without being exclusive to to the
Well,
Messiah only.
well, sure.
That's
Ultimately,
why I
the
brought this
entire
up.
Tanakh is messianic. That's the whole point.
Right.
Is
Exactly.
if it's relevant for all generations, that means it's equally as relevant for the messianic generation, right?
Exactly. So that is
So,
my approach. You're right. My approach is to not fight the Christian on whether or not a prophecy is messianic, because what the Christian will do if you do that is they will, in chess, you ever play and somebody just keeps putting you in check over and over and over and over and
mhm,
over again until they stalemate? Because that's a way to stalemate in chess, is you just keep, making the king go back and forth. Like, I forget how many moves it is. Maybe if you do the same exact move, both players, for like 3 or 4 turns, I forget exactly how much, that's a stalemate.
mhm,
And that's what the Christian is going for. They want you to go back and forth. So just accept the idea that basically what I do is I do a queen's gambit. You'll see, because our queen is, that's not messianic, right? And nobody wants to lose their queen, but you can still win chess without your queen. This isn't checkers. And that's the
mhm,
game I play. I'm willing to sacrifice my queen for the sake of going for a checkmate instead of keeping my queen and settling for a stalemate. I would
right,
argue that Tobia's approach, he keeps his queen because I don't want to lose my queen, but he ends up in a stalemate because they'll just, but this is messianic and this is messianic, and he fights it. Whereas I say, here, it's all messianic. Have my queen, but I'm going to put you in checkmate. And
right,
we're going to do that just now. So we castled. They can't, deal with us now because we accept that this is a messianic prophecy. Any prophecy could be generically messianic. Now we have an established idea that of a king at the end of, so, okay, so let's look at prophecies
Oh,
that
one
we
more
both,
thought I had. Something,
yeah,
just a quick afterthought on your last point. How
mm,
you said that the servant has to be completely sinless, blah blah blah, right?
mm,
I've been studying the book of Mishlei recently,
mm-hmm,
Proverbs, and I'm sure you're acquainted with Mishlei. A lot of times, Solomon kind of uses code names for himself throughout the
mm-hmm,
book, right?
right,
Um, and in one of the cases, he refers to himself as the son of the blameless one.
mm-hmm,
Um, by most standards, especially the Christian one, how is that possible if he's referring to his father David? When most Christians see David as a very bad sinner for, you know, marrying the woman who would end up being Shlomo's own mother. So once again, it just kind of shows the non-objective stance, right?
mm-hmm,
But also shows that via the Jewish approach of though you sin, you can confess, repent, and come back to Hashem. You can again be blameless, right?
mm-hmm,
So I thought that was just an interesting point that by Solomon's own admission, right, in a book that both sides would agree is the word of God and holy, he
mm-hmm,
refers to David as blameless, right?
mm,
And if he's writing it, that means it already had to have been after Bathsheba,
mm-hmm,
right?
right.
So um,
Right.
it's
It's contextual abuse of this idea of sinlessness and what that really means. Like a
right,
great
right.
example you bring up, you
The
know,
expectation by them is like sinless completely without
yeah,
even the ability to make a mistake, right?
right.
Rather than what true righteousness is having the capacity to do something wrong, but
Mhm.
taking responsibility and rectifying it and getting yourself back on the right side of the line, you
Right,
know?
exactly. Yeah, so exploiting that weakness in the Christian argument is really the key to checkmating them.
Hmm.
And you'll see it's going to come full circle when we, inevitably, basically, the way the Christian plays the game. They're going to eventually get into their Isaiah 53s and their Daniel 9s. Since we
Yep.
castled at the beginning, they're going to want to be like, but the rabbis, and it's like, okay, they want to play checkers now. It's like
Hmm.
we agreed to chess, right? Yeah, and one thing that I also don't like to do in my approach is I don't like to bring up, Christian idea. Like I don't like to make assumptions about what Christians believe. I state my own beliefs, and then, using the Tanakh only, and then inevitably the Christian will start, but the rabbis, but the rabbis, but the rabbis. Once they do that, I could choose to correct them on the rabbis. Sure, fine. But after I do that, that gives me leverage because now I can say, now that you've distorted what the rabbis say, now I'm going to give you a taste of your own medicine. And then they'll say, no, you took Hebrews chapter 1 out of context, whatever. It's like, just like you took like, I'm not going to bring up Hebrews 1 in the first place, right? I'm just going to assume that they're going to agree with me that 2 Samuel 7 verses 12 through 16 is messianic. If they're not, then they clearly don't understand their own beliefs because they're beholden to that. Most
Hmm.
Christians are educated enough, and they will say, "Oh yes, it's an eternal Son." Great. They don't even have to know Hebrews 1. It's just that's very the like, eternal Son. That's the way they'll interpret that. But then they'll also kind of have to go the other way and recognize Solomon in the immediate context. So why
Hmm.
is that so important? Because now we're going to contrast that prophecy is our foundation for messianic prophecy, but let's find something that is even more specific to the Messiah that Jews and Christians can both agree upon. This is about mutually agreed upon criteria. So we're going to go to my favorite messianic prophecy of all time. This prophecy is Hosea chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. And here's what it says. It says, "For the children of Israel shall remain for many days, having neither king, nor prince, nor sacrifice, nor pillar, nor ephod, nor teraphim. And afterwards the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and they shall come trembling to the Lord and to his goodness at the end of days. Why is that so important? And why do I love this messianic prophecy so much? Because it describes the period of exile that we're in today, where we don't have a king, we don't have a prince, we don't have a sacrifice, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a temple, we don't have those things. And then it says, afterwards, the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king. That's important because David their king and the Lord their God are mentioned separately from each other. And then it says, they shall come trembling to the Lord and to his goodness at the end of days. Now, I have had conversations with Dr. Michael Brown. I have had conversations with Radar Apologetics. 99.9% of all Christians, and you can tell me if this is your experience too, Steve,
Okay.
agree that when it says David their king in that verse of Hosea 3, verse 5, that refers to the Messiah, son of David, and only to the Messiah, son of David.
Yep.
Your experience as well, right?
100%. Yep.
So what we have done, we have established a consistent standard of Davidic kingship, and we've even established a timeline. You
Mm-hmm.
see? Because one of the things that the Christian will inevitably do in the debate later is they will say that the Messiah had to come before the destruction of the second temple. And they'll
Right.
quote Daniel 9 out of context, and they'll say, now, one thing that's interesting here, when it says David their king in the Hebrew, you would expect maybe, if you weren't familiar with how the Tanakh works, that that would say Mashiach ben David or something.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the actual Hebrew? What does it say for David their king? It says David Malkam.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Literally David, their king.
yeah, a king. So this is how I will exegetically establish a standard, because this isn't the only prophecy that does this. Okay. And by the way, I've done my research on this, and I would challenge any Christian to find me a rabbinic commentary that says anything other than when it says David their king there, that it refers to anybody else other than the Messiah, son of David.
Right.
So yeah, I'm looking at the Rashi right now, and yeah, I mean, there's really no way around it.
Right.
Like it's
And interestingly enough, it's also making a stark contrast between the high priest, which they're saying will also come back and be active again at the redemption with the temple, right? It's making a stark contrast between that office and David their king, which again is another checkmate on Hebrews, which says that the roles have now been fused into a single figure, right?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So this is just to establish, right, a mutually agreed upon criteria. Now, I always find it interesting because, Christians often will bring up, well, okay, before we get to that, I'm going to go to the book of Ezekiel, because now we've to corroborate this evidence, right? Because if we have one prophecy that uses the expression David their king,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay, fine, but let's look at Ezekiel chapter 37. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in Ezekiel chapter 37, let's start roughly around verse 21. It says, say to them, so says the Lord, behold, I will take the children of Israel from among the nations where they have gone, and I will gather them from every side, and I will bring them to their land. So once again, it's leading up similar to Hosea verses 3 and 4, right? Where it says the children of Israel will remain many days without having a king or prince or sacrifice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, Christians will say Jesus is their sacrifice and Jesus is their king, but God says otherwise during the final exile, that we won't have a king and we won't have a prince. So that's important to emphasize. Likewise, in Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 21, it says that, the same setup, that during the final exile, there's going to be, a lot of, things that will happen. And it says, I will make them into one nation and in the land of the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be to them as a king, and they shall no longer be two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms anymore. And they shall no longer defile themselves with their idols and their detestable things. So this is saying after that time that they were in exile, and this is saying after, and then they're going to have their king, right? And I will
Mhm.
save them from all their habitations from which they have sinned and purify them, and they shall be to me as a people, and I will be to them as a God. And my servant David shall be king over them, and one shepherd shall be for them all. They shall walk in my ordinances and observe my statutes and perform them. Okay?
Mhm.
Ask a Christian, is this when it says, my servant David shall be king over them? Once again, and you can tell me if you've had a different experience, Steve, 99% of all Christians will tell you, I'm just saying that just as a caveat. Really, it should be 100% because there's, if we're being serious with our definitions that we agreed upon, a Davidic king who will rule, establish the kingdom forever, that's the definition we agreed upon in 2 Samuel. So they're beholden to that still. So when it says exegetically, a Davidic king who will rule over them all and observe my statutes and perform them, and then it says, they will dwell in the land that I have given to my servant Jacob, wherein their forefathers lives, and dwell upon it, and their children and their children's children forever. Remember, back in 2 Samuel, the Davidic king will establish David's throne forever. So once again, the Christian is forced to have to accept that this prophecy of a Davidic king in the
Mhm.
future is only about the Messiah and no one else,
Right.
right? I'll form a covenant of peace with them. Covenant. Once again, the Christian, they can't resist. They're just like, it's a smorgasbord. Oh yeah, this is messianic. You know, even if they wanted to resist it, they couldn't, because it has all of the language that they love. Covenant, son, king, all of it's here. Prince. I
Mhm.
will place my sanctuary in their midst forever. That's the third temple, but don't tell the
Right.
Christians, but and my dwelling place shall be over them, and I will be to them for a God, and they shall be to me a people. Wow.
Mhm.
Wow. And the nations shall know that I am the Lord who sanctifies Israel, and my sanctuary is in their midst forever.
Right.
There's no way around it. So once again, we have exclusivity to the Messiah, son of David. Now, there's a challenge that often comes up when you present this to a Christian because they realize what's going on. So for
Mhm.
a second, they want to go for a stalemate. You know what they do here, Steve?
What's that?
They say, well, it says David, their king. So why can't this servant be David? They'll say there's no statement in the Tanakh that says the Mashiach is supposed to do X, Y, Z. We know who we're talking about, Pastor Eduardo. We see you. We see you parroting Dr. Michael Brown. We know how this works because
Mhm.
Dr. Michael Brown wants to play a stalemate here and say there's no explicit passage in the Bible where it says the Messiah will do anything except Daniel 9 because they make up their own, standard for what they want the Messiah to do, even though there's no corroborating evidence that exegetically points to what they claim. Remember, because we've already established in both of these passages, Hosea and Ezekiel, not that the Davidic king will come before the destruction of the second temple, but rather in both of these passages, which exegetically link to the Davidic king that we
Right.
already agreed upon being, at the very least, inclusive of Solomon and the future Messiah, right? These passages are even more specific because they don't refer to the past, but to the future. At the
Mm.
end of days, Davidic king. It's exegesis that they can't resist. So if they want to say this refers to a resurrected King David, be my guest. But that resurrected King David is not Jesus, right? You could say that the resurrected King David, I guess you could say, sure, I guess that's the Messiah if you want it to be, but you're not going to see rabbinic commentaries typically, endorsing that, right? A Davidic king, a resurrected David does not refer to Jesus, right? Because they claim that David was a sinner. So
Mhm.
let's say hypothetically they want to knock the pieces off the board and say, well, it doesn't agree with your rabbis because it doesn't, whatever. For one thing, they're wrong. The rabbis unanimously say that this is about the Messiah, as far as I can see. But on the off chance that there's a rabbi that says it's about King David somewhere, That doesn't do anything for the Christian because once again, King David was, according to them, a sinner. So that would lend more credibility to the rabbinic position that the
Hmm.
Messiah is not Jesus, even if it is a resurrected King David. This is
Right.
steel manning their argument, right? Instead of fighting the idea, I'm not even fighting the idea that it could refer to a resurrected King David, that the Messiah could be a resurrected King David. I know that this is sacrificing your queen, right?
Hmm.
Because I don't believe that the Messiah will be a resurrected King David. I believe it will be a son of David, and that's based on 2 Samuel. But let's say it is, then that would mean that it's not Jesus. The Messiah is still not Jesus, and it doesn't really make any difference. So we've already castled, so they can't pull that on us. You see what I'm saying?
Hmm. Hmm.
Makes sense?
Yep.
Okay, fine. So here's a third prophecy, and this is just to, the icing on the cake. Jeremiah chapter 30, where it says, "For behold, days are coming, says the Lord. I will restore the captivity of my people Israel and Judah, says the Lord, and I will restore them to the land which I gave their forefathers, and they shall possess it." It's the same setup as Ezekiel 37:21 through 28, same setup as Hosea 3, verse 4 and 5. And you can guess where it's going, right? And these are the words that the Lord spoke to the Lords concerning Israel and Judah. And it says, "For said the Lord, a sound of quaking we have heard, and fear, there's no peace." So this is a time of turmoil, Jacob's trouble, right?
Hmm.
As Christians always refer to it. "Ask now, see whether a male gives birth. Why, I've seen every man with hands in his loins like a woman in confinement, and every face has turned to pallor. For ho, that day is great with none like it. It is a time of distress for Jacob," right? Christians love Jacob's trouble, through which he shall be saved. Okay, so who's going to save him? Let's see. "And it shall be on that day that the Lord of hosts will break his yoke off your neck, and I will break your thongs, and strangers shall no longer enslave them." Okay, so obviously Hashem is going to save us, but
Hmm.
who is going to be the inclusive of the kingdom here? It says, and this is the verse, "And they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will set up for them." Once again, David their king is mentioned separate from the Lord their God. It is the exact same Hebrew expression that is used in Hosea chapter 3, verse 5, where it says, "David Malcham," right? That David their king. That is used here. The Lord their God and David their king. So once again, exegetically, yeah, it says Elokehem ve'et David Malcham. Literally verbatim the same Hebrew as Hosea 3, verse 5.
Hmm.
So once again, if you ask 99% of Christians, should be 100, whether or not Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 9, when it says David their king, refers to the Messiah, son of David, and no one else, once again, the Christian will say, yes, that is the Messiah, son of David. So what is our mutually agreed upon criteria? The Messiah will be a Davidic king who will rule at the end of days after the final exile. And we have three corroborating prophecies that exegetically include that criteria and can all be linked back to the initially agreed upon criteria of messianic prophecy regarding 2 Samuel 7, verses 12 through 16, which establish the idea that the Messiah will be a Davidic king who establishes David's kingdom forever. You follow?
Definitely. Definitely.
So now we have a standard that even the Christian agrees upon for
Right.
exclusivity to the
Hmm.
Messiah, son of David. It's not a generic, because remember, what's unique about our castle at the beginning is we've already given an example of a prophecy in 2 Samuel 7, 12 through 16, where this isn't an exclusively messianic prophecy, but it
Hmm.
is a messianic prophecy, right? We agree, even though we don't believe what Hebrews 1 says. We agree that this future son of David that will establish his kingdom forever is the Messiah, son of David.
Right.
We don't believe he's God. We don't believe he has to come before the destruction of the second temple. Why? Because we just showed 3 prophecies that consistently describe the Messiah as not coming before the destruction of the second temple and not being God.
Mm-hmm.
So we have corroborating evidence that the Christian agrees upon. So now the Christian, inevitably, at a certain point in the debate, will bring up Isaiah 53. Okay?
Yep.
Now, when they do this, now this is something that a lot of counter-missionaries don't realize. What they do realize, and Tovia does a great job of bringing this up, is that throughout the entirety of the servant songs of Isaiah, the servant is referred to many, many times as Israel and Jacob, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, remember what we said earlier about the sinfulness of, the idea that Christians don't like the idea of a sinful Messiah. They
Right.
hate that. So what they will do is when they see, Israel being referred to as a servant, they get very excited when the servant is referred to in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
So they will gladly agree when you see in the servant songs, let's say it says my servant Israel or something, or Jacob, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's definitely Israel. They won't fight that because it's described in a sinful way. But there's an exception to that in the servant songs that a lot of counter missionaries have missed. That is Isaiah chapter 49, verse 3. And I'll explain to you why the Christian doesn't want this servant to be Israel and what they really eisegetically, when I say eisegesis, that, just for our listeners, eisegesis means when somebody doesn't use the, Tanakh or the Hebrew Bible to explain something. It's basically when they make up their own interpretation that isn't biblically
Mm-hmm.
found.
Right.
They take an external explanation of something and say, when it says Israel, it really means Donald Trump, or
Right.
like something,
Force
like
fit it
they'll
in
make
there.
up,
Mm-hmm.
there's no real like foundation for it in the Tanakh.
Right.
So we'll see what happens with Isaiah 49:3. So
Well, if I may, because I'm sure I
yeah.
know where you're going, Isaiah uses a very poetic, um, his usage of the names Israel and Jacob are quite poetic in
Mhm.
that he basically describes the remnant, the righteous of the nation as Israel, and that their mission is to return Jacob, or the sinful of the nation, right? Or the wicked part of the nation, and that Israel's mission is to return Jacob back to
Mhm.
observance, which is, I'm sure that's where you're going with this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so take it away. I mean, that's why they don't want that to mean what it means, because that means that there is a righteous remnant of the nation, right?
Right. They don't know what to do with the righteous remnant because that disturbs their narrative that this, the servant, would have some level of like, yes, on the one hand, they might be inclusive of the sinful nation, but there's always a righteous remnant, right? There
Right.
always has been a righteous remnant before Jesus, after Jesus. There's always been a righteous remnant. Isaiah is a part of that righteous remnant.
Sure.
So confront a Christian. So, like, let's say we take this hyper literally, right? It says, he said to me, you are my servant Israel, about whom I will boast. Well, Christians, they love to look at Isaiah 53 and say, well, it uses the pronoun he, so it must refer to a singular individual, right? They don't like to use the idea that, in Exodus chapter 4, verse 22, it says, Israel is my firstborn son, right?
Mm-hmm.
They reject using that exegesis, to apply here. And they'll say, well, no, Isaiah 53, when it says, he, that can't refer to a collective nation, it must refer to a singular individual. Well, if we use that same standard for Isaiah 49:3, and you'll see why this is important in a second, you could say at the very least that this must refer to Isaiah, because Isaiah is the person being spoken to here, right?
Right.
It said to me. So who is the me? Isaiah. So you can't have your cake and eat it too, Christians.
Yeah, well
who,
then to
you
devil's
know?
advocate that the argument will be, oh, well it was a how do they say like a retro fulfilling prophecy. Like he said something in the moment thinking it was about him, but it was actually the Messiah talking. I've heard that argument so many times.
Right. And that's eisegetical and eisegesical. Like if
Right.
you Occam's razor, if you're really using, because that's what they're trying to do, like, oh, the easiest explanation is that it would be a singular individual because it says the pronoun he. Well, I
Hmm.
would argue the easiest explanation, if you're going to use that Occam's razor argument there, let's use it here. Who's me? Oh, you want to say it's retroactively? But you're still fighting against the plain meaning, right? But that's not the, once again, that's not really the
Well,
point of
well, if you want
it.
to, if you just to, take this tangent a little further and then you can get back to it. But if you're going
Hmm.
to use Occam's razor, then you have to use Occam's razor against Isaiah. That's the book you're in.
Yeah,
And constantly he puts singular next to plural in a poetic fashion.
right.
I mean, that's really indisputable, you know? So if we're going to
Yeah.
be using the Occam's razor argument on either side, it's constant where he says, for example, like witnesses, servant, man, sons of men.
Mhm.
It's constant. So
Right.
if Occam's razor really is the like what is
I mean,
the
I love
conclusion
Occam's
that
razor. I do. Like, I'm not.
of course,
Yeah.
but that's the thing like on their side if they're saying they're using Occam's razor to prove their point, clearly not, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. Exactly. They're picking and choosing and whatever. But yeah, that's a little superfluous. But here's what it says explicitly. It says, "You are my servant Israel, about whom I will boast." Right. So Israel is described as the servant explicitly. There's no way
Hmm.
around it. Right.
Right.
And then it says, "And I said, I toiled in vain. I consumed my strength for naught in vanity. Surely my right is with the Lord and my deed is with God. And now the Lord who formed me in the womb as a servant to him and said to bring Jacob back to him, and Israel shall be gathered to him, and I will be honored in the eyes of the Lord. And my God was my strength." And he said, "It is too light for you to be my servant to establish the tribes of Jacob and to bring back the besieged of Israel, but I will make you a light of nations so that my salvation shall be until the ends of the earth." So Christians believe when it says Israel here, my servant Israel, that this is actually secret code word for Jesus. Not a lot of Jews know this. They miss this point. And I think Tovia, when he debated, you can see on my channel, I recently did a review of the debate that Rabbi Tovia Singer had with Dr. Michael Brown. This was a complete missed opportunity. And this is something I've confronted Dr. Brown with directly on his show to ask him, what do you believe about this servant? Is this the same servant when it says my servant Israel in Isaiah 49:3? Is this the same servant as the servant of Isaiah 53? He said, yes, it's the same, right? He doesn't believe it refers to anybody else but his Jesus, right? So that's why I say, so you believe Israel is secret code word for Jesus here. Now, why is this so important? Because once again, we castled. Okay, so I am not going to fight the Christian on Israel having a application to the Messiah here. That's
Hmm.
not an issue. Same
Right.
with Isaiah 53. The Messiah is very well within the exegetical bounds of being part of the servant of Isaiah 53 and Isaiah 49, who I agree are the same servant. No
Hmm.
problem there. But the Christian is being eisegetical and assuming that the word Israel here must refer only to the Messiah, son of David.
Right.
Why? Because there is no place in the entirety of the Tanakh where the word Israel is used to exclusively refer to the Messiah, son of David, and no one else. I've done my homework on this. I would challenge
Hmm.
any Christian to show me anywhere in the Hebrew Bible where the word Israel is used to exclusively refer to the Messiah, son of David, and no one else. It
Hmm.
doesn't exist. It does not exist anywhere. Why is that so important? Because we already castled, right? You want to say,
Right.
oh, a rabbi says it's messianic. Oh, a rabbi says it's about an individual. Great. None of the rabbis say it's about Jesus. Oh, but it's an individual. It says, he said to me, it can be about Isaiah. Dr. Brown tried that. Okay, it's about Isaiah. That's still not Jesus. That doesn't help. They're going for the stalemate again.
Hmm.
Oh, here's a rabbinic commentary. I'm
Right.
going to knock the pieces off the board and say, when your rabbis say this. Ah, okay, interesting. So once they start doing that, and I did this on Dr. Brown's show, once he starts taking rabbis out of context and saying that rabbis say that it's about, an individual and not a collective group, which isn't true in the totality of what the rabbis understand. Obviously,
Hmm.
there's rabbinic commentaries that say it refers to Isaiah, but they also include the remnant, which Isaiah is a part of, right?
Hmm.
So that's not an issue. But if you go to Acts chapter 13, which Paul and Barnabas are being they're talking to the Jews and they're trying to
Hmm.
convert them to their new religion of Christianity and to believe in Jesus. And what what is said is then Paul, and this is Acts chapter 13 verse 46. It says, then Paul and Barnabas answered them boldly, we had to speak the word to the of God to you first, to the Jews, right? You
Hmm.
first, then the Gentile. Since you reject it and do not consider yourselves worthy of eternal life, we now turn to the Gentiles. For this is what the Lord has commanded us, plural. I have made you a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring salvation to the ends of the earth.
Hmm.
What are they quoting from here?
Hmm.
What is this quote from? You know,
From Isaiah 49.
from Isaiah 49, verse 6.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I'm trying to click on the footnote here. Yeah. So, regardless of whether or not it's referring to a singular entity, right? Because when I'm clicking on this, it's really funny how the Christian position is trying to simp like for this position. Is it's funny. I'm clicking on it. It says the Greek is singular. Okay, great. Yeah, here it is. Isaiah 49, 6, right? It doesn't matter if it's singular or plural here, right? You, right? Because you, in a singular sense, can refer to a collective group of people. Who has commanded us? You, right? So, and you can see in Isaiah and other parts of Isaiah where you is used in the singular to refer to the nation, even
Right.
whether or not it's in a sinful state or in a whatever state they want to refer to it as. So
Well,
it's,
they
it's
they also don't really pay attention to the verbiage in Isaiah 49. Like,
right.
let me quiz you a little bit because you're very knowledgeable on this chapter because this is like Brown's bread and butter, right?
Mhm.
So the initial mission, right? Hashem said to me, it's not a light thing that you are Israel, my servant. It's not a light thing, right? But then how does he word it, right? If this singular individual in verse 3 is called Israel, but then also throughout the chapter, it says that his mission is to Israel. How can his mission be to himself, right? That's kind of like a bit of a discrepancy there, but like I said, let me quiz you a little bit. So in all the things where it says what his mission is, for example, to return Jacob
Mhm.
and gather the besieged of Israel, what's the dichotomy there? Or later on, I think it's chat or verse 6, to raise up the tribes of Jacob and how does he word it? Restore the preserved of Israel. What's the dichotomy between Jacob and Israel in these verses?
Right. So they will say, yeah, that is interesting. Yeah,
It's
Jacob,
showing that, like I said before,
yeah.
wicked versus righteous, right? It's showing that because of the wickedness of Jacob or the en masse, and I just talked about this in my Isaiah 53 video. I don't know if you watched it.
Yeah, yeah, I watched it with you and Davon. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But if it's showing that the tribes of Jacob or en masse, the nation is wicked, that you need to return the wicked in order to gather back the righteous who happen to fall under the, you know,
What's the
exilic punishment
chronology
or
of it? I look at it, the
exactly.
chronology is very important here, is that the
Right.
Christian interpretation requires them to, like, here's how the Christian would read this, like if they're actually being faithful to what they're claiming about Jesus today. It would go something like this. He said to me, "You are my servant Jesus, about whom I will boast." Chas v'sholom. It says, and he said, "I toiled in vain. I consumed for strength, for naught in vanity. I went to the Jews first, and they rejected me. Surely my right is with the Lord, and my deed is with Jesus."
Right.
And now Jesus, who formed me in the womb to be a servant to Jesus, said to bring the newly grafted in branches of the Gentiles to him, and the newly grafted in Gentiles will be grafted to him and
Right.
be honored in the eyes of the Lord. And it's not because remember, they don't believe that they believe that Israel rejected him. That's
Right.
what they claim.
Right.
So they're not being faithful to the chronology here. They're saying the servant toils in vain because all the Jews reject him, and then the Gentiles already get him, right? Because they say,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, oh, there's billions of Christians who have found the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob today. They'll make that argument. Like, okay, but it doesn't say that the Gentiles are going to receive the word of God before the Jews are restored back to, Israel is
Mm-hmm.
restored. If you actually faithfully read these verses chronologically, it says that the Jews, the Israelites, will be the light to the nations. And you
Right.
see this reflected in Zechariah chapter 8. Tovia quotes that verse all the time, where it says that the Gentiles will come to the Jews and say that
Mm-hmm.
the Lord, that God is with you, right? None of that's quoted in the New Testament, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because it doesn't fit with anything Jesus did. That's the tell, right? Like, if they're so obsessed with messianic prophecy, why doesn't the New Testament quote from Zechariah chapter 8? Why doesn't
Exactly.
it mention the fast days? It says the fast of the fourth month, the fast of the fifth month, the fast of the seventh month, the fast of the 10th month shall be for the house of Judah, for joy and happiness, for happy holidays, but love, truth, and peace. How many messianic believers in Jesus do you know celebrating these holidays, as
Zero.
these are fast days
They
that
don't even know what days they are.
only rabbinic Jews fast on
Mm-hmm.
Tisha B'Av? Do you think Dr. Michael Brown fasts on Tisha B'Av? Do you
Definitely
think
not.
do you think Zev Purat? Do you think Eduardo, Pastor Eduardo? They don't even care, right?
Right.
So how can this prophecy, messianic prophecy that says at the end, when all the nations come and worship the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem, they'll come from year to year. It says the Lord of hosts in those days, 10 men of all the languages of
Mm-hmm.
the nations shall take hold of the skirt of a Jewish man, saying, "Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you." That's not Jesus.
Right.
Otherwise, why you would have something to do with Zechariah chapter 8:19. The New Testament would quote that somewhere, and the
Mm-hmm.
Messianics would have some, the Dr. Brown would be either fasting or celebrate. They don't even acknowledge Zechariah 8:19. So it
Right.
can only refer to rabbinic Jews. It's
Sure.
like proof is in the pudding. So
Yeah, take that same tactic you did where you plug Jesus in where it says Israel,
yeah,
and then plug in like righteous remnant for Israel and
yes,
rest of the nation for Jacob and see how much more sense the chapter makes.
yes.
You know what
They
I
don't know.
mean?
Like, here's the dichotomy that happens. Ask a Christian, is Isaiah a part of the righteous remnant of Israel? And they'll say yes. And it's like, okay, so why can't Isaiah be the one being spoken of when he said to me, "You are my servant Israel, about whom I will boast"? Well,
It's
they will
just like
say,
in Jeremiah, the same verbiage is used,
yeah,
right?
well, they'll say Isaiah is sinful. They'll say, even though he's a part of the remnant, he's sinful. So they don't know how
But
to.
you just admitted he's part of the righteous remnant. So what kind of sense does
Exactly.
that make?
Right, exactly. So they have no idea what to do with the remnant. So once again, if they keep fighting this and they keep trying to quote rabbinic
Right.
commentaries out of context, that's when I say, okay, if you want to stop playing chess for a second, well, I'll play your
Hmm.
game of checkers and I'll beat you at checkers. So
Yeah,
let's go to
and
Matthew.
Brown drives himself into a corner with that same thing because
Right. Well, if you
he'll
go to,
acknowledge that Psalm 44 is the prayer of the righteous remnant, but then
yeah.
says that the righteous remnant doesn't really exist in Isaiah 49, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, they don't know what to do with it. So what I'll do here is, and this is another point that I bring up with this, is when you look in Matthew chapter, uh, this is chapter 2, right? This is an
Mm.
infamous verse. Michael,
Out of Egypt, right.
yeah, Michael Skobac likes to quote from this, rightly so, to say, like, so it says he got up, he took the children. This is when Joseph, the adoptive father of Jesus, um, took Jesus to Egypt, and it says he stayed there until the death of Herod, and so was fulfilled what the Lord said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." Where is
Hmm.
that quote from? What is who said, "Out of Egypt I called my son"?
That's from Hosea, I think, right?
Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. So here we have an instance where Hosea is describing a nation, right? It's
Hmm.
not referring to a singular individual here.
Right.
It says in Hosea chapter 11, "For when Israel was young, I loved him,
Hmm.
and out of Egypt I called my son." The more they called to them, the more they went away from them, and to the Baalim they would slaughter sacrifices. So the Christian is perfectly fine. They have no choice with Hosea chapter 11, verse 1, when it says, "Out of Egypt I called my son," even though it's a sinful Israel in the immediate context, they have no problem with that referring to maybe they would say like a midrashic sense of it
Hmm.
referring to Jesus, right? Israel, the son, let's reiterate that one more time. They are okay with a sinful Israel in the immediate context referring to midrashically who they claim is their sinless Jesus in the case of Matthew chapter 2 when it says, "Out of Egypt I called my son."
Hmm.
So let's hold the Christian to the same standard using Isaiah chapter 49, verse 3.
And it's
If,
it's another it's another area
mm,
where a collective is quite clearly being referred to in the singular. So
yes,
even the authors of the New Testament were willing to acknowledge that, and as you said, kind of midrashically spin it, rather than
yes,
nowadays they say, oh, well, it doesn't work linguistically to say it that way. Well, clearly that's not the case, right?
right.
So they're
Well,
not even
holding
following
them to
their
their same
own,
standard.
right. They're not even following the same standard as the uh the people who wrote their Bible, right? So,
Exactly. Exactly. So that's why we castled, right? We're not
hmm.
fighting against, we're not saying Isaiah 49 has nothing to do with the Messiah. We're saying, yes, it has to do with the Messiah. And it has to do with Israel, the righteous remnant, and ultimately the whole nation, because the role of the remnant, first, Isaiah included, is to bring back the rest of besieged and sinful Israel. And then, after that is restored, then the nation serves as a light to the nations,
Right,
right? The fully
right,
restored nation. Not,
exactly.
yeah, as we just described, and that's corroborated by Zechariah chapter 8, verses 19 through 23, and also for Zechariah chapter 14, where it says that the nations will go up from year to year
Hmm.
to celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles, which is a Jewish festival,
Well, it's
which
also in Zechariah that it says a fountain of cleansing will be opened. Israel has to actually be brought back to the land to be cleansed before they can do their job, right? So it's
Mhm,
showing that same chronology, you know?
exactly.
So, yeah, very good point. Well met, for sure.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, for sure. And so yes, so the Christians are not being faithful. They're using eisegesis to make up the fact that Isaiah 49:3 is secret code word for Jesus when it says my servant Israel. But and if their argument is, well, Israel was sinful and it has to be a completely sinless servant, then you can throw out of Egypt I called my son being a
Hmm.
reference to Jesus,
Right.
because you can throw out the book of Matthew then, because that's
Hmm.
referring to a sinful Israel. Yet you have no problem with "out of Egypt I called my son" when in the immediate context it refers to a sinful Israel. You're saying, oh well, yeah, it also refers to a sinful or a quote unquote sinless Jesus.
Well,
Same.
how do they get around Isaiah 42? Because Isaiah 42 pretty much says the same thing. So, did they just say that Isaiah 42 is the same context?
I mean, regardless, once again, I don't fight against the idea of, if they want to say there's a messianic overtone there, I don't have a problem with
No, no, no,
that.
that's not what I'm asking. Like they
Yeah.
say that only Jesus could be the servant in Isaiah 49, the singular Israel, that's the light to the nations. What I'm
Yeah.
asking is, did they hold that same standard for 42 when I know that Michael Brown says the servant changes from a collective to a singular in 48?
Right. I mean,
That's my question. Does like
except look,
does he think one instance in 42 is a singular rather than I'm just
I
asking because you're like very much in Michael Brown's arguments, right?
right,
So
right,
like
right.
so what does he do with 42 if this is how he feels about 49? That's my question.
I think he does look at 42 as singular, but like look, and you can once again, you can find rabbinic arguments that also argue for that, but that's not what we're getting at here. We're getting at the idea that Isaiah 49, when it says that the servant is Israel, that it they're not holding themselves to the same standard that they hold themselves to when it comes to Matthew and playing fast and loose with sons and out of Egypt and whatever when they're okay with it. That because remember, go back to our original standard. We already established the fact that the Davidic king, right, in
Right.
Second Samuel 12 through 16 can refer to a sinful person in the immediate context and the future Messiah in the future context, whether or not their
No,
sin
yeah. And here's the
is
thing, I'm
so different.
totally cool with that.
Yeah,
It's just I know I've heard Brown give lectures
yeah.
where like he will hang his hat, he'll hang his hat on coming against like he will readily admit, okay, sure, the servant is Israel up until 48. Now it's
Mhm.
somebody else, right?
Right.
But it's like, well, and I'm not saying that
But
there
you're
aren't
saying he flip
opinions.
flops because 42. Yeah, he'll say that.
That's what I'm saying, though. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that there aren't opinions that, because honestly, I understand the servant to be the same throughout the entire book, right?
Mhm.
So it's just another expose of
Yeah, inconsistency of standard.
yes,
You're
his
pointing out that he
standard,
just doesn't have a consistency. And that's
right,
exactly what this chess game
exactly,
is
that his
about.
standard
It's
changes based upon the question,
Exactly,
right?
exactly. He's knocking off pieces. He's saying, you can't move your piece like that, but I get to move my knight all across the
Right.
board any way I
Right.
want.
And
Right,
that was my
exactly.
point. That was my
Yes.
point. I agree
Yeah,
with the rabbis, right? There can be the messianic implication and
yeah.
there can be the righteous remnant implication, and they're mutually inclusive,
Right.
right? My point was he seems to have a cut and dry idea of, well, this
Mhm.
is this and this is that. Uh-oh, well, now I
No
have
standard.
a
No
refutation.
standard.
Well, now my standard changes. Exactly.
Right, exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then of course you talked about this in your other video. So on Isaiah 53, check that out, everybody, with Dave on Mays. Um, with Isaiah 53, with Psalms 44. I also talked about that in my video, and I showed where Dr. Michael Brown explicitly says that's the prayer of the righteous remnant.
Hmm.
The imagery is uncanny
Right.
about referring to the servant of, in Isaiah 53, if you compare, it says, like he was like a lamb to slaughter. The remnant is
Hmm.
described as in a collective, right,
Yep.
as being sheep for slaughter. And
And
it
it
says,
says, we never forgot your name, but still you afflicted us, right?
right, and it also says, here's the really important part is I think there was somebody in my comment section that was really pushing against this. And I said, it was really, really ironic, is they said to me that there's no like substitutionary atonement here in the way that it's described in Isaiah 53. Well, let's steelman that for a second. It says here in in Psalms 44, verse 23, it is for your sake that we are
Hmm.
killed all the time, but
Yep.
we are considered as sheep for the slaughter. For your
Hmm.
sake, right? Not against God's. Remember, like you said, they're following the covenant. It says,
Hmm.
our heart has not turned back. We
Right.
nor have steps turned away from your path.
Hmm.
Right? All this has befallen us, and we have not forgotten you, nor have we betrayed your covenant. This is
Right.
even Dr. Brown admits this is about the righteous remnant.
Yep.
No way around it. And then it even says, why do you hide your countenance? Why do you forget our affliction and oppression? You know what this sounds like? My God, why have you forsaken me?
Hmm.
It fits with the remnant here. You can't, it's uncanny. So lean into this. Yes, you can argue that the Messiah will suffer. You can argue rabbinic commentaries that say the leper scholar. I don't care.
Isaiah 54, I hid my countenance from you for a short time, but I will return you.
My God, why have you forsaken
It's
me?
all
Why
over
is
the
the
place.
remnant?
It's
It
all
says
over the
the
place.
servants of the Lord in the plural. It says
Hmm.
they will be. And of course, the clincher and Tovia, this is Tovia's like, one hit kill with Isaiah 49, or sorry, 53 verse 9, I think it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where it says that the servant is going to be described as, sinless, like not in the absolute sense, but like there was no deceit in his mouth or whatever, right? So what Tovia likes to, Christians obviously view this in the absolute sense and whatnot. But if you exegetically look at Zephaniah
Yeah, Zephaniah 3:13.
chapter 3 verse 13, it explicitly says, the remnant of Israel shall neither commit injustice nor speak lies, neither shall deceitful speech be found in their mouth. That's almost verbatim from
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah 40 or 53 verse 9.
Right.
There's literally no way around it. And the
Mm-hmm.
Christian will say, oh, it's a future prophecy. I don't care. Who cares if it's future?
And
You
Isaiah
can't.
53 isn't. You can look at everything as a future prophecy if you want
Right,
to.
it's absurd. Like it's like the most insane cope. Like he gave his grave to the wicked and the wealthy with his kinds of death because he committed no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth. Right? If the remnant is being described as not having deceit in their mouth and not committing injustice, right? So in isolation, if you use their steel man their argument, where does it say they ever sinned? Right? It doesn't say either way, is my point, is that they're
Mm-hmm.
eisegetically assuming in the case of the servant of Isaiah 53, that servant must be completely sinless in the most absolute sense, no ifs, ands, or buts. And then they apply that same standard to Isaiah 49, even though the servant explicitly is described as Israel. And they eisegetically make up this idea that Israel is secret code word for Jesus there, even though nowhere else in the Tanakh is it used that way. And Matthew even uses the idea of a sinless son to apply to Jesus, and there's no problem with that. But for some reason, there's a problem in Isaiah 49:3 of it referring not just to the Messiah, but also to a sinful Israel in some way.
Mm-hmm.
They have no standard. That's the point. So they are beholden. It doesn't matter how many checkers games they try to throw at you and try to distract you. They are beholden to the Tanakh because even their New Testament uses the standards that we are to some degree, right? There's only so much you can get away with in a lie without the New Testament authors were evil geniuses is really the what I'm getting at, is that they knew what they were doing. They knew
Mm-hmm.
scripture. They were just setting up something that if if you blink and you don't know scripture well enough and you don't understand the foundations of messianic prophecy, that even Christians have to admit there is a standard here, but then it all goes out the window every time it doesn't fit with their narrative, and we have consistency and they don't.
Right. Right.
um,
For
One
sure.
final point I guess I can bring up in terms of this is you can apply this to any prophecy. Really, I used it with Isaiah 53, but you can use this with Daniel 9, for example, because
Mm-hmm.
Daniel 9, what's interesting about that is it doesn't use any um, you know mention of David there, number one. And it, for whatever reason, it's they say like this is the radar apologetics, and Dr. Brown will say like this is the only prophecy that describes a Messiah doing anything. The reason why it doesn't work for them there is we've already castled. We don't
Mm-hmm.
fight against the idea of that having future messianic application. What you do see is there are no rabbis, not one rabbi claims that the Mashiach, quote unquote, who is cut off in Daniel 9, refers exclusively to the Messiah, son of David, and no one else. What you
Right.
will find is Christians quoting rabbinic commentaries that say, they'll quote the Rashi, and they are correct that the Rashi applies this to the future messianic era. But look who Rashi says is being cut off here. He says it refers to Herod Agrippa. Now, that's not the only interpretation. Some say that it can refer to a high priest. That's the interpretation that I prefer. But the point being is that
Yeah, but
this
even
works.
still, maybe
Yeah.
you just misspoke there. Rashi does say it's around the same time period, but he's not relating it to the the messianic era if he's
He
saying
is,
it.
though. He is. If you look, I have the Rashi up here right now. It says, and his end will come about by induation. It's in unduation. It says, and his end will be damnation and destruction, and he will unduate the power of his kingdom through the Messiah. He does. I didn't misspeak.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, that's something different than what. Okay, I
Yeah, but this is my point though, is that our brain is so conditioned to want to fight against the idea because he relates it to Gog Magog. It says until
right,
the end of what
right.
I'm looking at it right now. That didn't happen yet. Christians don't believe that happened yet. He's relating the prophecy, and Yisrael Blumenthal discusses this.
Oh, but here's
The
the thing. Here's the
yeah,
thing. Maybe I just misheard or misinterpreted.
okay.
Yes, there's that messianic implication, but it
Mhm.
doesn't say that the messianic implication is at the moment that Herod Agrippa is cut off. Is kind of what I'm getting at.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's just like the Jewish understanding that the Messiah was born the day the temple fell, right?
Right.
Meaning
Got it.
that
You got
right,
it.
coming from
Yes.
there can the redemption begin.
Like, for example, I asked Radar Apologetics in my debate with him, can you show me any prophecy in the Tanakh other than your eisegetical interpretation of Daniel 9 that, because he claimed that the new covenant of Jeremiah had to happen before the destruction of the second temple. And I said, show me any prophecy other than your eisegetical interpretation of Daniel 9, because he's associating this Mashiach who's getting cut off with the new covenant of Jeremiah. Rashi
Hmm.
doesn't make that connection. No
No,
rabbis make that connection,
right.
right? But the Christian does. And I
Hmm.
said, show me anywhere else in the Tanakh. I wasn't even asking rabbis. I was saying in the Tanakh. That's our chessboard. And he said, I think only one prophecy is good enough to show that. And then I
Hmm.
said, well, I can show you 3, 4 prophecies, like Deuteronomy 30, like you talked about in your episode with Davon.
Hmm.
That's about the new covenant when it says
Yep.
that
Their hearts will be circumcised.
circumcised
Hmm.
exactly. Ramban, by the way, Nachmanides links that to the new covenant because that's
Oh yeah.
after. Right.
Hmm.
We just read in Ezekiel 37, it says, I will make my covenant with them regarding the Davidic king at the end of days, not before the
Hmm.
destruction of the second temple. The rabbis are unanimous about this.
Hmm.
So that's the standard that is set. That's why I said, like, we developed our chessboard, right, in a way where we castled. So anytime they say, well, this is messianic or whatever, the rabbis say this, we already have a consistent, and I did my homework on this. There is not one rabbinic commentary that associates the Mashiach being cut off in Daniel 9:26 with the new covenant, the initiation of the new covenant. Not
Right.
one.
And that's the point I was making, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is right, we both understand in accordance with the rabbinical understandings, mainstream Jewish understanding, that Daniel 9, it's a temple to temple prophecy, and that the point is the destruction of the temple, and from that darkness and exile can the redemption happen, not
Yes.
that the redemption and the new covenant is like a prerequisite for that temple to be destroyed and now it's no longer needed, right?
What this is, it's
They
the Midrash. There's a Talmudic passage that talks about Rabbi Akiva laughing when the temple was destroyed, and he was saying that
when
this,
he saw the foxes running on the rubble.
yes, you know
Hmm.
what he said in that? He said, his fellow colleague rabbis were like, "Why are you laughing? The temple's destroyed." And he said, "Well, now I know that the negative prophecy that I think it was Uriah or Isaiah, he said was,
It was
fulfilled. Now I know
Uriah
that
HaKohen.
Zechariah 8 will be fulfilled." He
Yeah,
quotes Zechariah 8. And
it
then they
was
said,
Uriah HaKohen who was killed
right. And so,
because Jeremiah had prophesied the destruction. Jeremiah was prophesying the destruction of the first,
yes.
and Uriah HaKohen was killed because they believed he was just echoing the same thing. So Rabbi Akiva is saying, now I understand that Uriah HaKohen was talking about this temple, and now I know that the redemption can come.
And he quotes from Zechariah 8 about the children playing in the streets, right? And
Yep.
that was not fulfilled in the times of Jesus, clearly, because Jesus was already dead at that time. Why is Rabbi Akiva quoting a messianic prophecy,
Hmm.
in the future if it was already fulfilled in Jesus, right?
In fact,
There's no
Jesus
way
told
around.
his followers to run for the mountains.
Right, right.
So it's really such a double standard,
Right, exactly. So yeah, it says, old men and women shall sit in the streets of Jerusalem, and each man and his staff because of old age. That's what I believe. That's the verse that Rabbi Akiva quotes.
Hmm.
Because that's the Achilles heel. That's where the healing will come to take place. Because what does it culminate with? In those days, the children, or the nations of, the Goyim will come and take hold of the skirt of a Jewish man.
Right.
We have heard that God is with you.
Hmm.
Because Rabbi Akiva knew that prophecy has not been fulfilled yet. Jesus didn't fulfill it. And the future redemption will come with that. And that's what Rashi's saying when he relates Daniel 9 to Gog Umagog.
Right.
And
Exactly. Hmm.
right, he's saying he's using that same sentiment as Rabbi Akiva. The destruction of the temple is the setup for the redemption. And that's what
Yes.
Rabbi Yisrael
Exactly. That
Blumenthal
was my point.
argues. Yes,
Hmm.
that's what Rabbi Yisrael Blumenthal argues in Contra Brown, right? Everybody should
Hmm.
check that out. And
Yeah,
that's what it is.
definitely.
But none
Definitely.
of them, once again, and reiterating this, none of the rabbis say that the new covenant of Jeremiah was initiated with the cutting off of the quote unquote Mashiach in question in Daniel 9:26. None. And that's the point that you can push up against. You got to be very nuanced with these arguments. I'm not even
Hmm.
fighting against a messianic connection in Daniel 9 to the
Right.
totality of it, but I am fighting against because it goes against our standard. Where is the mention of a Davidic king in Daniel 9 specifically regarding the Mashiach
Right.
being cut
Right.
off? Nowhere.
Well,
That's why there's
like we
ambiguity.
established earlier, of course it has messianic implications because just like the book of Isaiah, Jeremiah, all these things, how does
Yeah.
Jeremiah like metaphorize their redemption? He always refers to it as the light, right? Like rise and shine, for your light has come.
Mhm.
Um, it's the same thing. You need the darkness first for
Right.
the light to come. So, of course, that same idea, that same vein of thought, right? There's night before there's morning. The idea of the Jewish day, the Hebrew day in the Torah, right?
Yes, yes.
Um, Rashi's clearly running with that. The prophets are running with that. That and it's in Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 30, right?
Yep. Yep.
That you need to excuse me, that the darkness and the harshness of the dark of the nighttime is
Yep.
what then leads to the morning or the redemption, the light coming, right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's the point Rabbi Blumenthal and Contra Brown, Rashi, all the prophets are making, is
Mhm.
that in the messianic process you need darkness for the light to be truly understood and taken with gratitude. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up Leviticus 26 because that is my favorite. So I did a debate with he's a Messianic rabbi, Eduardo. Um, he goes by Radar Apologetics. Of course, if you're familiar with either of our work, the reason I was interested in him is that he basically parrots Dr. Michael Brown's
Hmm.
stuff, and he will say things like, "Where does it say in the Tanakh where the Mashiach has to do X, Y, Z?" And in Daniel 9, right, once again, there, it doesn't fit with the standard. Right,
Right.
that's the point. Is that there is an inconsistent standard that, like, none of the prophecies that we agreed upon earlier, right? Hosea 3 verse 5, Ezekiel 37, verse 24 to 28, and Jeremiah 30, verse 9, all of those agreed upon criteria, Davidic king who will rule at the end of days. None of those say he has to come before the destruction of the second temple. If the only prophecy you can show me in the entirety of the Tanakh that you want to say supports your position that the new covenant has to come before the destruction of the second temple is Daniel 9:26, or that the Mashiach has to come before the destruction of the second temple, that is eisegesis, and you don't have, you're betraying the mutually agreed upon standard that Jews and Christians agree upon, which is foundationally based on 2 Samuel 7 verses 12 through 16, that the Mashiach will be a Davidic king who will rule on David's throne. But that prophecy itself doesn't say when the timeline is. But if we have three prophecies that consistently say that, if you have Ezekiel 36, when it discusses the new covenant, it's once again, that's discussed in a way where it says after the ingathering of the exiles, not before the destruction of the second temple, right? Sprinkle clean water on you and give you a clean
Yep.
heart, and this replace the heart of stone with the heart of flesh. That is the new covenant, and Christians agree. But once
Exactly.
again, it's not saying that happened before the destruction of the second temple.
Of
Rather,
course
it says,
not. Of course not.
right, it says the opposite. It says that it will happen after that point in time, right? When I'll just put the verse up for good measure. Yeah, it says, I will take you from the nations and gather you from all the countries, and I will bring you to your land, and I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and I will clean you will be clean from all the impurities and your abominations. I will cleanse you, and
Hmm.
I will give you a new heart. That's the chronology again. And I will put a new spirit within you, and I will take away the heart of stone in your flesh, and I will give you a new heart of flesh, and put my
Hmm.
spirit in you, and you will walk in my ways and keep my statutes. It goes hand in hand with what was described in the next chapter, Ezekiel 36, which we already described is a future messianic prophecy when it says David their
Yep.
king. And the same chronology is mentioned once again. The covenant that is made, the covenant of peace with them, is not made before the destruction of the second temple in Ezekiel 36 or Ezekiel 37 or
Hmm.
Deuteronomy chapter 30. Oh, Daniel 9, I
It's
only need one prophecy
post-exile.
to prove that, right?
Hmm.
No, you're not using a consistent standard. That is the Achilles heel. This is how you play chess. This is how you checkmate them. They
And
don't
ju-
have a standard.
and just to show that the Jewish position uses the same standard, that the prophets use the same standard, you mentioned the new covenant in Jeremiah 31.
Yeah.
Well, what's the chapter right before Jeremiah 31? Is
Yep. Jeremiah
Jacob's
30, which we already
is
quoted from.
Jacob's
Yeah.
trouble, right?
Yeah.
Talking
Yeah.
about the hardships, the exile, all the sufferings that Israel will go through
Yep.
prior to the new covenant,
Yep.
right? So it's just like Isaiah in 52. How blessed are the feet that bring the good news of redemption,
Mhm.
right? So you have to have the suffering and the darkness and the hardship before you can have the redemption, not vice versa, right?
Well, ask a Christian, what part of the new covenant did Jesus fulfill? Which part? Oh, a new heart? Well, if that was the case, then why does it say that according to the new covenant, it says, I will place my law in their midst and I will scribe it upon their hearts. I will be their God and they shall be my people. And no longer shall one teach his neighbor or teach his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me from the least of them to the greatest.
Right.
And I will forgive their iniquity and forgive their sin. And what, so this would mean if the new covenant already happened, and you have a new heart, then you don't have to teach me.
We
Why
wouldn't
is
even be having this conversation.
exactly? And I made that point in Radar Apologetics in the debate. I make it against Dr. Brown if I had a debate against him. Of course, he will never debate me because he claims I'm not a rabbinic scholar or whatever. Like that's the thing. You can say Toby is running from Dr. Brown, but Dr. Brown's running from me and everybody else at this point based on the allegations. But regardless, the point being is that
had to
yes,
had to
now the
twist
world
the
knows
knife a
Dr.
little, huh?
Anyway, whatever. Like the point being that none of these are within any sort of standard. And that's why when I did that debate with Radar, it was all about, it actually wasn't about whether or not Jesus was the Messiah. It was about whether or not, how do you deal with sin today, right?
Right.
We've
Is there
already
any
covered
Yeah, it was like, is there any other way to atone besides the blood of Jesus, right? That was
this
kind of your whole
Hebrews
point.
9:22. Yeah,
Hmm.
Hebrews 9:22 says that without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sin. And they quote Leviticus 17:11 out of context and say the death of the righteous atones for sin, this, that, and the other. Quote the rabbis out of context, fine. I don't fight that. Once again, my method doesn't fight against rabbinic literature and the idea that the death of the righteous can atone for sin. Because what are we
Hmm.
saying about Isaiah 53? We just read in Psalms 44 that the remnant is killed all the time for the sake of God.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not fighting against the idea that the death of the righteous can atone for sin. We just read it. Okay?
And
So
that, I
instead,
mean, that ties directly into like Sefer Eov, right?
yeah, that
That
too, yeah.
that Hashem brings affliction upon even the righteous for his own reasons, right?
Yes, yes, and brings healing to the nations in the sense that at the end of days, when you read Isaiah 53, the nations will realize, oh, wow, we thought Israel was suffering because they're just big bumbling idiots and they don't understand who the Messiah is and they don't understand this, that, and the other. When you see in the Tanakh over and over again in Zechariah
Right.
chapter 8, Zechariah 14, the Gentiles will come to the Jews to celebrate Sukkot, to come
Yep.
to the temple, that God is with you. I mean, like,
Exactly. And that's the
it,
healing to the nations, is that Israel has to go through the crucible to be
yes.
refined and made into, I think we spoke about it before, about like the Levitical priests in Malachi with the and Zechariah with the crowns of gold and silver, right? Like
Yeah,
you have to
purified. Yeah.
refine um sorry, had a
Oh, you're
major
fine. Yeah, you
brain fart
talked
here.
about it before. Yeah.
But just like if Israel is the nation of priests, right? The priestly nation to the world, they have to be refined so that they can bring that message to the nations, which, is the healing to the nations,
Exactly.
right?
It's
That's
future
the whole point.
prophecy. Like,
Yeah.
I agree with the Christians when they say, oh, where are you? You're not that light. Because our first goal, chronologically, if you read Isaiah 49, 3-6,
Hmm.
faithfully and actually care about what it says and not try to eisegetically claim that Israel is
Uh-huh.
secret code word for Jesus and that
Right.
the Gentiles are going to really know the word first and then, you know,
Yeah,
whatever.
the,
Like,
the goal is to refine each other first.
yes, yes. So the Jews, obviously Israel is supposed to restore, the remnant restores the rest of Israel. Israel can suffer for Israel. There's no problem with that. If you understand Psalms 44 as the righteous remnant,
Yep.
why is that a problem? Collective people can suffer on behalf of God. It's not just a singular individual,
Hmm.
right? Great. So there, the death of the righteous atones for sin. You can apply the remnant to Isaiah 53, Psalms 44, Isaiah 49. It all connects together. And that's the idea, is that even we don't even have to go into the idea that Leviticus 26, when it says that we get forgiveness of our sins through confession of sin and humbling of our heart, or that it says in Jeremiah 29 verses 10-14 that during the Babylon, basically echoing that we confess our sins and God will save us and restore us back to the land, right?
Mm.
No Jesus blood required for any of that, right?
Right.
We don't even have to go into that because we've already provided an alternative mode of atonement, forgiveness, salvation, whatever you want to say, through a
Hmm.
collective group of people suffering on behalf of not just the rest of Israel, but the entire world. And that's what Isaiah 53 is all about. But yeah, like that's my favorite point to exploit in Christianity, is that they claim not only that Jesus is the sole covenant bearer or whatever of the new covenant and that it's all focused on him, but they also build a stack of cards around, a house of cards around the idea that the only way to receive forgiveness, salvation, and atonement is through him. When you see during times of exile, Daniel is
Hmm.
described as a righteous person, a part of the righteous remnant,
Yep.
right? And he didn't need any Jesus blood in order to achieve that. You can, I brought that up, Ezekiel chapter 14, verse 14, where it says Daniel's righteous. How is Daniel righteous if he doesn't have Jesus blood? And Daniel 9 says, or even Abraham, right? Abraham's righteousness was before the covenant between the pieces, by the way, because they say, oh,
Hmm.
blood sacrifice, whatever. He was already righteous in Genesis 12. I brought that up in Radar Apologetics in our debate. Like, his faith didn't include the belief that Jesus died for his sins on a cross.
Right.
That's the hill they die on. That's where they hang their hat. Yet
Yep.
nobody in the Tanakh had that belief who was righteous.
Hmm.
So why do we have to have that in order to be
Right.
saved or to be
Right.
any of that? We don't. No Jesus blood required. Leviticus 17:11. Yes, it is inclusive of, there is a way to atone for sin through sacrifice when there
Hmm.
is a temple standing. That's a valid method of doing that. And
Yep.
that's what we want. I think that's very important to reiterate too, is that Christians say,
Sure.
well, if you
Exactly.
don't, they'll always bring this up, is they'll create another false dichotomy, is they will say, well, if the sacrifices don't matter, then why did you have a temple? What was the point of it? What prayer is just the only thing? And that's not what Orthodox Judaism believes. 3 times a day, Steve, I pray for the restoration of the sacrificial system in the Levitical priesthood.
Sure.
Orthodox Jews have been doing this for over 2,000 years.
And those
Okay.
those prayer times are modeled after when the offerings were brought. So
And also
it's
Daniel
very it's
chapter
intrinsic. It's intrinsically connected. The two are very important.
in Daniel chapter 6, in Christian Bibles, I think it's verse 10, and in Jewish Bibles, it's verse 11. It says that Daniel prayed 3 times a day in the face of death when he
Yep.
was threatened to go into the lion's den if he continued to pray.
Hmm.
Okay, so Christians make the argument, like, why would somebody die for what they believe to be a lie? I'll make that same argument for Daniel. Why
Yeah.
was Daniel praying 3 times a day when he knew that he was going to be thrown into
Right.
a to his death? Basically, he didn't have a guarantee he was going to survive this. If he was just doing this because it was a tradition of men or something like that. It's this is what
Especially when they hold the standard that when the because their big thing with like when the second temple was destroyed is that annulled the commandments. But I always refute that with like, well, what about when the first temple was destroyed? Why do you always seem to forget about that part?
Right.
So what was Daniel doing?
Right,
Like,
exactly. Yeah, they don't have any way to they claim that you have no temple, you have no here's what it says in Isaiah chapter 56, which is right on the coattails of Isaiah 53, right?
right.
It says here, it says, and the foreigners who join with the Lord to serve him in the love in the name of the Lord. This is like future messianic prophecy, right? And it says to be his servants, and everyone who observes the Sabbath from profaning it and who holds fast to my covenant, I will bring them to my holy mount, and I will cause them to rejoice in my house of prayer, and their burnt offerings and their sacrifices shall be acceptable upon my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. That is the future messianic redemption. It's not
Yep.
just about prayer. It's not just about sacrifice. It's both. We want both. They're both important. And that's also something that I do differently from at least the way Tovia used to argue this in the past. I don't say that it's better to pray, and I don't say that it's better to sacrifice. I quote from Isaiah 56, and I say both are important ultimately in the future messianic redemption. This is referring to the third temple, right? Any Christian that's going to tell me that the third temple doesn't exist, there's no prophecies about this in the future messianic era. Explain to me how Isaiah chapter 56, verse 7 is fulfilled. Explain to me how the future prophecy about all the Gentile nations going up from year to year to celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles, according to Zechariah chapter 14, after the final war against Jerusalem, Gog and Magog. Explain that to me. When did that happen? Oh, it didn't? Okay, so then that's a future prophecy about the future third temple that, is going to happen, and you better not be on the wrong side of that, or else that could end up not too favorable for you.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's your warning. Not you, but anyone that's you know, coming up against Jerusalem in the future.
Right. Well, all right, my friend. Anything else to add?
I think we covered so much.
Yeah, we did cover a lot of ground. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this was a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you for coming on. But yeah, everybody, this is what I'm talking about is Yehuda's willingness to not only respect the sages, but use them and their wisdom in conjuncture with Tanakh as they're intended, right? And I think one of the main things we can take from your approach is kind of like the idea of inclusivity rather than exclusivity, right? Like you made the contrast of there's the Christian understanding of atonement through the exclusivity of Jesus's blood. And you combat it with, well, what about the inclusivity of prayer or the smashing of idols? All these different things are explicitly saying that they atone, right?
You're
So
just
when you
going for the checkmate.
exactly,
I go
exactly.
for a
So when
very
you
like it's
yeah,
not about knocking off all the pieces off the other person's
that's the
board.
thing.
Once again,
When
it's
you
about
show that there's anything else, you've just checkmated them because that then, negates the
that's
claim.
why I do love Occam's razor. That's kind of what it is. What is the
Yep.
path of least resistance? You know your opponent's weaknesses. Oh, you believe that the only way to atone for sin is through the death of Jesus on the cross? Let me show you dozens of examples of other people receiving forgiveness of sins
Right.
during times of exile without a temple,
Right.
and righteous people that didn't need Jesus'
Mm-hmm.
blood to atone for their sins. Oh, so
Exactly.
we've already checkmated you on that. That's the end of it. You don't even have to discuss Isaiah 53.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm saying is when you go through mutually understood criteria and you establish the understanding of,
Right.
Davidic king who will rule at the end of days, they can't fight it because they have to, even if they pretend like if they try to hustle you and say, well, I don't know chess, but yeah, they pretend
Mm.
like they don't know how to play or whatever. It's like, you know how to play, man. Like, put your pieces back on the board. Stop playing checkers. Stop throwing your knight up in the air. Let's play chess. You know how to do it. All right. Stop stalling. And it does take an insane amount of patience. I'm not going to pretend like it doesn't. But hey,
Right.
I
No,
did
totally.
I did your homework for you. If you want to know, check out my channel. Look at the videos. I talk about, like, Isaiah 9:5 through 6, for example. That's kind of a caveat to this. It says from now into eternity, right?
Hmm.
Which means it has to have, because that's a Davidic king, right? That is actually a prophecy that kind of fits into that Christians are inevitably going to. So before we end, I wanted to maybe cover that. What's beautiful about that is it kind of fits the same motif as 2 Samuel
Right.
7:12 through
That
16. They'll say, oh,
that
the
there's a
rabbi
present
says.
and a messianic implication. Sure.
Right, exactly. And Rashi even says, this is actually my favorite Rashi ever, because Rashi usually doesn't call out the Christians. You know what he says about now into eternity? Because he says, remember, the verse says, a child is born to us, a son given to us, and authority
Right.
given on his shoulder.
Right.
Son, oh, it's a son, right? The mighty God, everlasting Father. I guess Jesus is a father in this case and a son, but whatever. Christians don't care about that. They don't care about any sort of standard of consistency. Called his
Right.
name the Prince of Peace. Okay, great. To him who increases the authority and for peace without end on David's throne and his kingdom. So you do have Davidic kingship here, to establish it and support it with the justice and with righteousness from now into eternity. The Hebrew
Hmm.
words me'atav yed olam. Now means now. So when Rashi describes this verse here, what does he say about it? He says, from now into eternity, the eternity of Hezekiah, all his days. Now we find that Hannah said concerning Samuel, 1 Samuel 1:22, and abide there forever. So that's refuting the idea of an eternal idea. It must be God, because it can be applied to Samuel as well, right?
Right. Right.
Says, in order to refute those who disagree, i.e., the Christians who claim this is their Prince of Peace and their deity, we can refute them by asking, what is the meaning of from now? Is it not to say that the deity did not come until 500 years
Right. Right.
more in the future? So Rashi calls out the Christians directly here and says, okay, you want to say that this is about the future Messiah? Great. He's not fighting that. He's saying, but if you say that this is about not King Hezekiah in the immediate context, just like
Right.
they agree with us that,
Then what do you do it now? Exactly.
right, well, just like in King Solomon, the case, it's the same setup. It's like it
Hmm.
has to happen in this generation. It's King Solomon, and it's the future Messiah. The same
Right.
is applied to
Right.
Isaiah 9, and exegetically, we have proof from now into eternity.
Hmm.
There has to be something there. So then they can't
And
argue for this exclusively godly Messiah.
I made a similar point in my last video about what would the contemporaries of Isaiah, because these were all orations, right? Messages that he would have been preaching to
Mhm.
Jerusalem at the time. What would the contemporary person in Jerusalem, just the regular Shomer Shabbos Jew, what would they think when Isaiah is giving these things, right? For example, like you just said, Isaiah 9, as Rashi brought. Would they think that he's exclusively talking about something 700 years in the future, even though Isaiah is saying that this is relevant now? You know, sure,
And you can't avoid it.
there
This
can
was
be that messianic implication as well,
And
right?
then
But
he has chapters and chapters in Isaiah talking about King Hezekiah. And
right,
kings, it says there was no
exactly,
king like him before
exactly.
or after him of Judah that trusted in the Lord as much as he did, and that he followed the righteous path of his father David. He
Hmm.
didn't turn to there's you can't ignore the significance of this. You want to say it's about the Messiah, great, but you cannot ignore the immediate context, just like you can't ignore the immediate context of our initial, when we castled at the beginning and we said,
Hmm.
yes, it can be about the Messiah and it's about King Solomon in Second
Right,
Samuel,
right.
right? Likewise, you can also say that the one, like, the son that is born in Isaiah 9 is also in the immediate context Hezekiah, but also the future Messiah. So you're not fighting against the messianic
And
interpretation.
that's fine. If Isaiah has that in mind, that this is also implying for, the final, like the redemption and the messianic king, he's clearly using Hezekiah the as like the exemplar of what that'll be like, right?
Yes.
So
Hey,
that's how you can have the relevant to all generations, right? Like if you want to know what this individual is going to be like at the end of days, look at Hezekiah, right?
exactly. Mm-hmm.
And that's how you synchronize those two ideas and put it in line with the message of the Tanakh and the message of the sages, rather than, for example, the Jewish gatekeeping approach of say, oh, well, that's not the context, versus the Christian approach of saying, oh, well, the rabbis say here and here and here that this is messianic. You now just blended the two into perfect harmony,
Because
right?
they already, that's the way Matthew did that with out of Egypt I called my son. So they have no
Yeah,
choice.
right.
They don't have a standard, we do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The rabbis have a real standard. Like I said,
Yep.
show me any rabbinic commentary that says Hosea 3:5, Ezekiel 37 verse 24, and Jeremiah 30 verse 9, when it
Right.
says Davidic king who will rule at the end of days, that's about anybody else but the Messiah, son of David. You won't
Right.
find it. So it
Exactly.
shouldn't be a surprise why Isaiah 53 or Isaiah 49, when it says Israel, that it's inclusive of the Messiah, but not exclusive when you see different rabbinic opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Christians want to ignore the bigger picture and they just want to focus on, oh, look, it says a leper scholar. Oh, it's the Messiah founded on Chabad.org. I can show you the Rashi on Chabad.org where Isaiah 53 says it's about Israel. So
Right.
you can quote, there's literally this foolish person in my comments section telling me that they found an article on Chabad.org that says that Isaiah 53 is about the leper scholar. Great, Mazel Tov, Shkoyach. Guess what
Okay.
I found on Chabad.org? I'm going to read to you what Rashi says about the servant. He says specifically, Achen is an expression of but in all places we see that this came to him not because of his low state, but because he was chastised with pain so that the nation could be atoned for with Israel's suffering.
Yep.
Oh, I found it on Chabad.org. Yes, because both are true. It's not an either or situation. The
Mm-hmm.
Messiah is a part of Israel.
Exactly. Exactly. You'll be a horror and a byword to the nations.
And thank
It's
God,
all there. It's all
Tovia
there.
Singer agrees with this,
Mm-hmm.
right? I in my last video, you can check it out where I talk about, his part on Isaiah 53 in his debate with Dr. Solberg. Baruch Hashem, Tovia Singer used that exact argument. He
Right.
said,
Right.
listen, I have it right there. He says that it's not just speaking about, Israel and not the Messiah. The Messiah is included in that.
Of
And I
course. Of
literally
course.
used that as his argument against Dr. Solberg, who was helped by Dr. Brown. So you can argue maybe Tovia Singer had a debate against Dr. Brown a little more recently.
A
But
vicarious one,
right,
huh?
right. Whatever. Anyway, like I said, I'll debate Dr. Brown all day, every day. He's one running from the world now.
Right.
Anyway,
Yeah. But Yehuda, man, I really appreciate it. And like I said, I wouldn't have even had this episode unless I truly believe in what you're doing and the way you're doing it, you know? So for all the detractors who think he's simply just, giving Tovia a hard time or whatever, not at all the case. Like I know them both well, nothing but respect, you know? But it's just like a game of football, right? Sometimes a new playbook comes out and a defense doesn't know how to respond. You are the new defensive playbook, you know? So, like I said, the the current generation, the guys at the top now aren't going to be here forever. So, I really think the future is bright. Um with you continuing your work in this realm. So, please, please, please keep it up and you have people behind you, don't worry. Um so yeah.
thanks so much, Steve. Yeah, I appreciate all that you do. And I'm looking forward to the new stuff you put out, your new books and new videos. And thank you so much for your support and insight. It's really, really awesome.
Of course,
Go ahead.
yeah. I just yeah, I think for a person like me, right, leaving Christianity, all that, you kind of have like that early period where you study to disprove their position. But then as you get further into it and you like really start seeing the beauty of Judaism, the sages and so on, you learn just to learn as if Christianity doesn't exist. And
Yeah.
that's where that harmonious um approach comes from, is because I care only about Judaism and what the Chachamim say. I don't care about making an argument just to disprove their argument.
Right,
Judaism does that just fine without me making stuff up. you know?
right,
So we need to embrace the sages, not not try to gatekeep the sages or keep them hidden under a rock, right? Because the technology's out there. They're going to find it anyway, right?
exactly.
So that's my goal. And there are passages out there that say, one of the worst sins you can do is scorning the sages, and that's the last thing I want to do. So,
Right.
um, yeah, and I know you have that same sentiment. So, like I said, man, really keep up the good work. Your arguments are sound, they're good, and they're there to. I think they're simple enough and short enough, right? You don't need to have a doctorate to understand where you're coming from, right?
Right. You notice I don't fight linguistically, and I also don't fight philosophically when I make my arguments. I avoid the
Right.
Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't really care about fight. That's their oral tradition. I fight on grounds that we agree. We
Right.
disagree on what the Trinity is. We disagree on the idea of the what do we agree on?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what
Right.
you want to really
Exactly.
force a Christian back to.
Yep.
And if they're not, then you call them out and you say, I want to look for points of agreement. And
Mm-hmm.
this is where we agree. And I'm not trying to shout past you. I'm not going to quote your New Testament out of context or in context to prove your point, against you, unless you do it against me first. And in
Right.
my experience, 100% of the time, it's the Christian who draws first blood,
Mm-hmm.
because the Tanakh is not on their side. It's on.
Exactly. Right. But yes, 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 yes. Like I said, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. Keep up the good work. And everybody, please, if you are a subscriber to this channel, you watch this video, please subscribe to Yehuda Yisrael. Get get the word out there, man. He's coming against the heavyweights on in the Christian corner. So until next time, everybody, this was the Exodus Project. I'm Steve Eisenhower. We'll see you later.